Hello, everyone. Last time we spoke, we talked a little bit about President Trump, his campaign, and why we believed it to be better than the Biden and Harris administration for a couple of reasons, but mostly from a spiritual or religious aspect. We look at some of his convictions, some of his endorsements and policies, and we see him really being the better pick for commander in chief as a Christian. But I've brought in Caitlin Booth, a political science major at Houston Baptist University, to kind of tackle some of the issues on the opposite side, the non-religious, the non-spiritual aspect of the entire election versus the two candidates. And we're going to be tackling some of the hot topic issues like the Supreme Court, Affordable Care Act, Biden tax cuts, and border security. How are you doing today, Caitlin?
I'm doing great. I mean, it only took us an hour and a half to get the video stuff sorted out. It's been a bit of an adventure there, but it's good to finally talk to you. I haven't seen you in about a year and a half now. Or you're in Florida right now for school, right?
For sure, yeah.
Yep, and I'm haven't left Houston my whole life, so here we are.
All right, well, it sounds like you're ready. We're going to go ahead and tackle some of the first issues here. Caitlin, there are two sides to every coin, and with the perspective of this year's election we've chosen to take, that remains the same. In my last message, I posited, like we said before, that our current president is once again the best candidate for commander-in-chief, but I made it especially relevant for the Christian voter. However, there are more than just Christians who believe Trump to be the better choice, and I'd like to explore some of those reasons beyond just religious conviction. Let's go ahead and move into question one if you're ready. First, let's talk about Amy Coney Barrett. Nominating ACB for the recently vacated seat on the Supreme Court seemed to light a fire beneath the majority of the Democrats in the Senate. So much that as the days pass on, the rumors of packing the courts are slowly becoming more of a reality for the Supreme Court if Joe Biden is elected president. But President Trump strongly opposes the idea of packing the courts, and I'd like to go even further to say rightfully so. Caitlin, could you give an explanation of what packing the courts actually means for any readers or viewers that aren't exactly sure, and also explain why exactly this would have a negative effect on the Supreme Court itself?
Sure. And just to clarify for the audience, I am a Christian, and most of my views, while they come from a Christian heart and a Christian worldview, my heart is to be able to explain my reasoning behind my values for people who don't share the same background and don't share the same religious culture as I do, because truth is truth regardless of what angle you come from. On to the question. Packing the courts has been very much a huge question in my political circles recently. Basically, what that means for anyone who's not familiar, we have a certain number of seats on the Supreme Court already, and the Democrats are looking at adding to that number. This isn't a direct violation of anything constitutionally. However, you need to look at the reason behind it. The whole design of the American system is to have a limited government that serves the people and is based on the consent of the governed. Now, what the Democrats are trying to do is turn the judicial branch of the government, because remember, there's three branches, the legislative, executive, and judicial, and they all have different roles they're supposed to play so that they can kind of act as checks and balances for each other's power. But the Democrats are trying to add to that judicial branch and turn it into a mock legislation branch. Well, maybe not a mock legislation, but a faux legislation branch, because that's not what the Supreme Court is there for. You see this in a lot of the policies they pursue through the Supreme Court, the cases that they bring forward. They're trying to, what's the word? They're trying to usurp the power and the consent of the people through our current governmental system by creating really a superset of government through the judicial branch.
Excellent. And for those of you who watched the Amy Coney Barrett hearings, one thing that she brought up a lot is the fact that the Supreme Court is one of the only non-political branches of politics, as in, or is in our government rather, as in it being what organizes our law. Do you think that with Amy Coney Barrett being so conservative as she is will play a part in perhaps leaning that towards a more political view, or do you think that Democrats will try to make a stab at that?
I think Barrett is definitely going to keep a very, whatever you want to call it, originalist, constitutionalist view and positioning on the courts. I haven't actually heard any direct statements from her about packing the court, but for the reasons that I mentioned, as far as keeping the government small and keeping the branches separated, any conservative, traditionalist, originalist view is going to be strongly, strongly opposed to this idea. There's no need to increase government without providing any actual value to the citizens.
Right, and I'm sure most of our viewers are familiar with the term conservative, but do you mind explaining the term originalist or textualist as they often refer to it for any viewers that aren't familiar with that?
So there's going to be a lot of overlap between an originalist or textualist individual and a conservative. A lot of the times they're pretty much the same thing. The key idea behind the specific idea of originalism or intentionalism is the idea of original intent. It's not about what we can interpret into the law, it's about looking at what the legislators and writers of a certain piece of legislation have actually, you can probably hear my dogs in the background, sorry, one's sitting right there. They're very excited about ACB's confirmation to the Supreme Court. They're singing.
They love politics.
They do. But it's about looking at what the original writers intended this piece of legislation to mean. It's about saying, what idea did we actually agree on to abide by as a nation, as opposed to what can we technically make be within the confines of the letters of the changing language of the law. It's the idea that the Constitution is a living, breathing, ever-changing document evolving with the times. But the Constitution was not meant to evolve with the times. It was meant to withstand the test of time, as Charlie Kirk would say. And that's what an originalist or a textualist would say. Justice Scalia, late Justice Scalia, was famous for this, one of the best originalists or textualists that you can find.
Before we leave this topic, I want to address something that you said before about originalism and textualism versus conservatism or liberalism. The Constitution is obviously a document that was written centuries ago, but you said that it should be able to withstand the test of times. So what are some practical ways that the Constitution can still apply to, 2020 versus 1776, or that time frame when the Declaration was written, obviously? Because obviously technology improves our society, but it also changes things as far as the law goes. So how is the Constitution, what are some practical ways that can play into that?
That's actually a really excellent question. So one of the most obvious sections of the Constitution would be the fact that we can amend it if we find it necessary. It's not a set document. This is how we absolutely have to live the rest of our lives. And we know that the First Amendment is a very famous and strong amendment. Second Amendment, I mean, those are the two that are being fought over the most. Those are additions to the Constitution that weren't there when it was originally written. So we have a way to add or to take away from the Constitution, and we have done both several times historically. Now, it's not as easy as many of the Democrats may prefer it to be, and some conservatives, but it does exist. And again, with the American system, the whole point is to prevent infringement. So it's not supposed to be easy to pass laws, especially changes to the founding document. This is very, very different from traditional parliamentary systems like we would see in England back then, or even England today. So it's supposed to be very difficult. However, it's supposed to be an option. And it is, and it's one we've taken several times. But as far as things that are already within the Constitution and still applying today, again, it's not about what's technically in the letter of the law. It's about the ideas conveyed. And if we're talking about rights, which is what most people tend to refer to when they're talking about issues or disagreements with the Constitution, the rights aren't given to us in the Constitution. They're legally recognizing that we have those rights as human beings. And your rights don't change with time. Black people were not given freedom in the United States. Their natural inherent freedom as human beings was recognized by the United States government. And that's true for every single law. People will say, oh, well, the internet didn't exist when they wrote the Constitution and when they wrote the First Amendment, so there's no freedom of speech, right? That's not the idea. We as humans have an inherent right, not given to us by government, but recognized by the government, thankfully, that we have this freedom to speak and to think and to speak our minds. And this applies to everything.
Excellent. We're going to go ahead and move away from that onto our next question. It touches on the recent activity in Washington concerning the Supreme Court as well, and it has to do with the oh-so-popular Affordable Care Act. President Trump has expressed his desire to abolish the ACA on multiple occasions through the Supreme Court, and many believe that to be the reasoning behind nominating Amy Coney Barrett for the seat. However, the president has not left his constituents helpless. He also committed to taking the good parts about the ACA, such as coverage for pre-existing conditions, and applying them to a new plan of some sort if he is chosen to lead us for the next 4 years. Caitlin, many Americans are very apprehensive towards this expressed desire to dismantle the ACA and worry that confirming Amy Coney Barrett has made this an inevitability. What are your thoughts on this situation as a whole, and should Americans be worried about it?
Good question. So something very telling about the Democrats, and referencing what I was saying earlier about wanting to legislate from the bench, this worry that the existence of Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court is somehow going to affect what is ultimately the job of the legislation and then confirmation of the executive branch shows that they're worried about legislating from the bench. That's not going to happen. That is not how this would work. Even if Trump appealed it tomorrow completely, it would have nothing to do with the Supreme Court and the judicial branch. Now, from my understanding, and this is a complicated issue, and as much as I support many of Trump's policies, he's not the most clear communicator when it comes to his plans and future goals, and I wish he would be a little more direct on that. But so previously, he repealed the individual mandate of Obamacare. It was a huge highlight of his administration, freeing up people to not be forced to paying a penalty for not having the meager health care that Obamacare provided for the American people. Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, same thing. Trump is looking at repealing and replacing, keyword replacing, the Affordable Care Act. And the Democrats don't inherently have an issue with it. It sounds scary to have this medical care repealed, but he's wanting to replace it. He's not looking to leave the American people high and dry. There's been attacks on him about, and you brought this up, about him not covering people with pre-existing conditions. He actually has been quite explicit that that would not be an issue. Even in the vice presidential debate, Mike Pence addressed this as well. He's trying to open the Affordable Care Act structure to some capitalistic competition in order to make the healthcare system better, which is one of, aside from the original mandate, it's one of the biggest flaws of the Affordable Care Act. It doesn't synthesize well with the private healthcare industry, meaning that there's no competition and no incentive for the ACA to improve its system and improve its implementation. Trump is trying to take the basic structure of the ACA and give it that competition and give it that incentive to be excellent, as much as a government program could be.
Right, and I don't know if you know anything about the supposed Biden care plan, but are you familiar with that? And if so, what do you think are some of the implications of that could have a negative effect on our nation? Much of it looks similar to what we see already in Obamacare, but I think that they're wanting to move away because of such of the bad reputation that it has. What are your thoughts on that whole situation? And do you think that there are negative implications towards Biden's plan versus Trump's plan, or vice versa?
So speaking of people with difficulty communicating, Biden has described some interesting ideas as far as Biden care goes. I think it's just a rebrand of the Affordable Care Act. And honestly, I don't think if he got in as president, I don't think that he would actually do something with it. I think that this is actually just a response to Trump's response of the Affordable Care Act, because this is a very, obviously the candidates themselves are quite unique when you look at our political history, but the dynamic between the two campaigns is actually quite interesting. So I think Biden care is more of a reaction. Now, I have seen some, I'm going to say unverified articles that suggest that Biden care would actually expand the Affordable Care Act, but not so much in a way that benefits the American people all that much, meaning he would want to move it towards a more universal healthcare, more socialist looking version of healthcare. And I mean, historically, that's never gone well for people. But regardless of the plan that he says he has, I don't really see anything being implemented. Like I said, I think it's just a rebrand.
Most polls show that the majority of Americans are against communism just because of just the constant backlash that we've seen throughout the world even. But a lot of young people especially, it seems like, are just a lot more embracing of socialism. Could you explain just quickly some of the negative implications that socialism could bring on a country like ours with such a strong economy based on capitalism?
Right. So I used to be the person that said socialism was great in theory, but historically in practice, we just see it not working out. But I kept reading into socialism and I kept thinking about it. And I concluded that in theory, it's not even good. Socialism is impractical, impoverishing, and actually immoral. When you look at the basic structure, the whole premise is we take from the rich and give to the poor. Now, this sounds very Robin Hood-esque as a hero, but this isn't tax money incorrectly taken from people. This is money earned by corporations by bringing value into other people's lives. Apple didn't take however much money my phone was, I don't remember, say $500. It didn't take $500 from me. I voluntarily gave them, say, $500 because I valued their product more than that $500. But socialism says that no, it's actually theft. And because Donald Trump made more money in reality than in the real estate market than I did, having not even a bachelor's degree, I just exist, and therefore I should have as much money as Donald Trump. The government is now in charge of taking his money and giving it to me. And where I'm from, taking something without permission is typically called theft. And that's exactly what socialism advocates for. So it is immoral. Now, as far as being impractical, we've never seen it work. It's been tried so many times in over, I think it is 30 countries. And off the bat, look at Venezuela. It kind of booms the economy. All the folks like me who like to spend money on more backpacks that we don't need, we suddenly have a whole bunch of money that we didn't earn, and it's great, and we're happy to spend it, and it throws the economy into a boom. And then all of a sudden you run out of other people's money to give to people like me, and then you've got an issue, and then the whole country collapses. Look at Venezuela, look at Cuba. All of this is what's going on. Even China right now, and their full-blown communists are hitting some major economic issues. So it's impractical. It doesn't work. And at the end of the day, that impracticality leads to impoverishment. Look at the people of Venezuela. I keep bringing Venezuela up because it's the most recent one, but like I said, it's been over like 30 countries at this point. And they are literally, as of 2016 at least, they were breaking into zoos and eating the animals that were in the zoos because not just a couple poor people, the entire country is unable to get basic food. I think the first year that the economic downturn hit in Venezuela, was it 40% of the population had lost over 20 pounds involuntarily due to starvation. It doesn't work, and it leaves countries way worse than it would be if it had just, I don't know, didn't steal from people.
Obviously, we didn't plan to talk on socialism, but it's such an important issue right now, especially since seemingly everyone in the Democrat Party wants to move towards it, regardless of the negative implications that it's had everywhere else all throughout history. We're going to go ahead and talk about our last scripted question. Doesn't mean we can't expand on to more content afterwards, but it has to do with border security. One of Trump's defining moments as a presidential candidate was his enthusiasm towards improving the security of our country's border, with constant jabber about erecting a wall along the Mexican-American border. Caitlin, why do you believe improving our nation's border is important? Also, on the opposite side, what are the implications of an open border type of approach like many of the Democrats are rooting for?
Right. So being able to secure your border is one of the most basic elements of a country and has been for pretty much all of human history. Now, it doesn't always involve a wall historically because it was a lot more difficult to get the resources necessary for a long time, especially the larger the empire got. See the Roman Empire. But it's protecting your border at the end of the day was incredibly important and is what actually led to the downfall of pretty much every major empire collapsing. Again, looking at the Roman Empire, they expounded so much, actually, they couldn't protect the borders, and then they were completely invaded and then wiped out. And now we have a whole bunch of cool ruins to look at. Now, as far as the famous building of the wall, walls are actually quite effective. See China, see Israel, actually see most other countries. It's actually very strange to me. Americans seem to have such a short perspective on history. Maybe it's because we're only 200 years old, but walls are actually incredibly effective. Now, as far as whether or not we'd want to protect our borders, well, do you want to be able to control who comes in your country and who doesn't? Now, a lot of people will say, oh, well, that's a racist idea, or, oh, you don't care about people. That's actually the furthest from the truth. If I didn't care about something, I wouldn't protect it. There are so many people who want to come to the United States and work for years, spending so much money to try and immigrate here, only to have some people crossing a border illegally and then committing crimes, even including murder, when in the United States. It's actually interesting. When you poll immigrants, most of them would prefer to see better border protection because they don't want people just usurping the hard work and line that they came through in order to be in this country. And before some Democrat hears this and then accuses me of hating all Mexicans, if we had an issue with Canadians crossing the border, I'd be promoting Trump to try and get the Mounties to pay for a wall at the Canadian border. It has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with whether or not an individual is willing to respect our laws and value our country and value the freedom within it. And when you look at the, frankly, young women who are sex trafficked over the border, that being from Houston, one of the highest centers for sex trafficking, that hits very close to home for me, even though I'm not on the border. The illegal activity that goes on over open borders just because of the legal differences in the countries is heartbreaking to watch, to know that these women are getting shoved into these border cities in the US, taken from their families often at a young age, because we won't do our job and say, no, you know what, we're not going to just literally openly allow a market for drug and gun and sex trade. It's almost our fault that this is happening to young women. That it's not loving to just allow that to happen. And most people who want the border wall are not, and when I say most, I mean the vast majority, they're not anti-immigrant. They don't hate Mexicans or any other Central American. By the way, there's a lot of Central and South Americans that try and come to the US through the border. It's not just people from Mexico. We don't hate them. The phrase that I like to use is, I would like a very high wall with a very wide gate. Meaning, I would love to let a lot of people in. I would love to grant refugee status to everyone who comes in and can show that they're actually refugees. I would love to do that. I love taking care of people. But the only way that we can effectively do that is to be able to control and be able to give ourselves the opportunity to make the choice to let someone in. And you can't do that unless you protect your border. Like I said, a wall is a great way to do it. It's not the only way. But at the end of the day, you do need to protect your border out of love for the people inside and outside of your country.
It was a pleasure getting to talk through some of these issues with you. I want to give you a brief opportunity to just communicate with some of the people viewing or reading this about what you're experiencing right now, what you're studying, some of the things that you're implementing for, just things of that nature, since we only covered what you're doing briefly as in political science major at Houston Baptist University.
Right, I appreciate that. So, well, my dog is apparently done with this interview. But like you said, I'm a political science major at Houston Baptist University. I'm currently trying to get a Turning Point USA club started on campus. It's obviously been very interesting with COVID, and I'm actually totaled my car, so I can't even go up to campus at this point. This coming summer, I should be interning with Congressman Dan Crenshaw, actually in DC, which I'm really excited for and preparing for. I am currently, and this may be the channel that we release this video on, I am currently building what's been on my heart for a long time, which is a YouTube channel that I'm calling A View from Gen Z. Around 1996 is the cutoff from millennial to Generation Z. Noah and I both fall in that category. And I see a lot of people stepping up for the millennials to be spiritual and cultural leaders for that generational cohort, but I don't see a lot of that for our generation. And as Roosevelt said, complaining about a problem without offering a solution is just called whining. And so I decided that I am going to start producing videos, just sharing and explaining and discussing ideas surrounding Western culture and the country that we're blessed to be a part of. Because as much as I love my country, she does have her flaws, and the response to those flaws shouldn't be to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It should be to say, hey, you're not as good as you could be. And so I'm going to step up and help you become the excellent thing that you're supposed to be. That's what you should do with yourself. That's what you should do with your friends, your family, your neighbors. And if anything, to leave a legacy behind, that's what you should be doing with your country and with your culture. And yes, I'm in politics, and yes, that's where I spend most of my time, but my biggest heart is actually for culture. Andrew Breitbart said that politics is actually downstream from culture. Yes, I can go to DC or become a legislator and work on policy, but it doesn't really matter if no one from my generation understands enough about American ideas and Western culture to even value them. And so if you're interested, I'll do a quick plug for myself. On Instagram and on YouTube, I'm A View from Gen Z. I'm going to be producing more videos soon after I get through midterms and all of that for school, because I mean, we have a great program for government at HBU, but it is a lot of work. So I'm getting past that. So if you read Noah's stuff, if you are familiar with him, he and I have a very similar background. We share a lot of the same heart and same views. So I'm sure this is not the last time you and I will have a crossover. So
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, check out A View from Gen Z if you're interested. If I find any embarrassing photos of Noah or any bloopers from this recording, I'll post it there to make sure that it's for the public to forever remember. So yeah, if that brings value to your life, come check it out.
And with that, we'll go ahead and move into our conclusion. For many of you viewers, you already know you can access my content through noahlane.org, or if you'd like my socials, you can visit noahlane.org/links, and it'll have my Instagram, my Twitter, YouTube, etc. All of my social media platforms there. If you'd like to access any of the content, we're putting out new stories regularly. This is going to be put into one of those stories. I think this will be our 5th one, so it's a lot of fresh content that I'm sure many of you guys would love to read. So make sure you look at that. And with that, we're going to go ahead and close. Thanks, you guys.